Hi, in this video we are looking at an algorithm problem from the 2016 HSC Software Design and Development Exam. This is question 31 and there are 4 marks available. A program for a puzzle is to be developed. The puzzle uses a 4x4 grid. A two-dimensional array called cell, where the first dimension is going to be referred to as row and the second dimension is going to be referred to as column, is used to store the number in each square of the grid. For example, cell 2, 4 equals 3 in the grid provided. So, for example, we have our array called cell, where 2 is the row, so we're getting row 2, and 4 is the column. So row 2 and then column 4, and in that position there, or that element of the array, is equal to 3. For the puzzle to be completed correctly, the numbers in each row must add up to 10. Okay, so let's have a look at the first row. That adds up to 9, so the puzzle is incorrect. We have a look at the second row, that adds up to 10. However, all of the rows in this puzzle need to add up to 10 for the puzzle to be correct. The following code calculates the total of numbers in the first row. Alright, so this code here is just for the very first row. Row total equals 0, for column equals 1 to 4, row total equals row total plus cell 1, column. So here, when we're accessing the cell array, we're just using 1 to reference row because we're only going through row 1. But in each iteration of the loop, we're going to be accessing column, which is going to be a value from this counter here. So 1, 2, 3, or 4. Depending on the iteration of the loop or where we're up to, how many times we've gone through the loop. So that's going to access all 4 columns from the first row in the cell array, and it's going to add up the value in each position of the first row to the row total variable and keep a track of the total of all of those numbers. Write an algorithm that checks whether a puzzle has been completed correctly and then display an appropriate message. So we need to check all of the rows in this puzzle and check that each one adds up to 10 and that they all add up to 10, each one, and display an appropriate message based on the result. So we already have this code here that we can modify and use in our algorithm. But that's just for the first row. So while we have a for loop that goes through the first row, we're also going to need that to be inside another loop that's going to go through each of the columns. Okay, so let's start writing out this algorithm, and this algorithm that I'm going to show you is based on the sample answer with maybe some small modifications. So we'll start with begin. Check puzzle. Oops. Okay, and we need a variable that's going to basically keep track of whether a puzzle is, or a particular row in the puzzle is correct or not. So if it adds up to 10 or not. So we can have a Boolean variable for that. Correct equals, and that can be true initially. And so what's going to happen is basically we're going to initially say that all of the rows, or all of the puzzle rows are correct. So we're going to say that's true. But when we find one that doesn't add up to 10, we're going to set correct to be equal to false. Now, we're going to have to keep track of the rows and columns. So we can start by saying row equals 1. All right. And we have a for loop here to go through each column. But what we can do to go through each row is use a while loop instead. And that can check 2 conditions. It can check while row is less than or equal to 4. So basically, while we haven't finished going through each row. And it can also check if correct is still equal to true. because if at any point during the loop we find a row that doesn't add up to 10, we can change correct to be equal to false, and the loop will stop running. So for this, we won't use a for loop, we'll use a while loop, because a while loop we can specify combination of conditions to check. So we can say while row is less than or equal to 4 and correct equals true. And inside that loop, we're going to need to keep track of the total of all the numbers in that row. So that can be row total equals 0. So that's going to need to be reset to 0 for each row. All right, inside this while loop that's going to go through every single row in the puzzle, we're going to need a loop that's going to go through every column in each row. And we can just use that for loop that was provided here and just modify it a little bit so that it's going through the correct row and not just through the first row. So we can say for column equals 1 to 4. So we don't need to change that because there are 4 columns. Row total equals row total plus. So we're just continually adding to the total every time we go through a column, and that's going to be cell and then row, comma, column. All right, so every column that it goes through for every row, it's going to add to the row total. Or for this row, it's going to add to that total the value in the cell array in position row, comma, column. So in the first dimension, which is called row, and the second dimension column. Right, so that's the end of the for loop. So we can just say next column, so that column counter will increment. And then while we're still inside the for loop, we can have an if statement that checks if that row total that we just added up, if that is not equal to 10. So not equal to 10. Then we are going to set, we're going to set correct to be equal to false. Now remember that every time this while loop runs, it's going to check if correct is true. So if it's changed to false, then the loop will stop running, which means we won't go through every single row in the puzzle because really only one of the rows needs to be not equal to 10 for the puzzle to be incorrect. And there's no point checking through every single row if we've already found one that's incorrect. Okay, so end of the if statement. And then we need to make sure that we increment the row counter in the while loop. So we can just say row equals row plus 1, or we could just write increment row, and then end the while loop. So you just always need to make sure whenever you're using a counter in a while loop, or you have a condition like this, row is less than or equal to 4, you need to actually make sure that that condition can eventually, or one of these conditions here can eventually evaluate to false so that the while loop can end. Otherwise, you're going to have the problem of having an infinite loop. Right, now once the loop has completed, we can just display an appropriate message, and we can do that by checking if correct was equal to true. So we could either say if correct equals true, or we could just shorten that to if correct, which means the same thing. So if correct, then print or display puzzle is correct. Else we'll print puzzle is incorrect. And that is the end of the algorithm. Okay, so what we've basically done is just make sure that instead of going through the first row, that we go through every single row in this two-dimensional array, and that we keep a total of the numbers in each row and make sure that they add up to 10. And if any of those rows don't add up to 10, then straight away the loop will stop running and we can say that the puzzle is incorrect. Otherwise, if we get to the end of the loop and correct is still equal to true, then the puzzle is correct. And so that's a sample solution for that question. Thanks for watching.